So it's really 30 years.
Tom, it's 30 years since the first Monette trumpet. Yeah, crazy. 30 years.
How is that feeling to you?
I look in the mirror and I go, who's the old guy? You know, they used to come to the shop 30 years ago, 28 years ago, they used to come to the shop and ask, so well, where's your father? They don't ask that anymore.
Did you ever think, I mean, I know people always ask you this, but did you ever think that 30 years later you'd be where you are?
No, because I really had no idea that I was ever going to have a trumpet factory. I just knew that I wanted to screw around with trumpets and see if I could get them to play better, and then all this just kind of unfolded. You know, there was no master plan. Oh, I'm going to have a trumpet factory, and you know,
really,
and all of that. Yeah.
Wow.
No, I knew that if I could do it, I wanted to make instruments, but there was never a master plan about how to do it, or you know, it was a fairly organic unfolding.
Did you try to make instruments when you were a kid?
No. No, I didn't try to make instruments until I played in a dance band traveling around the Midwest from the time I was, well, I played all through high school. The last couple years on high school, I was playing 4 sets a night, 4 nights a week. And I tried every trumpet and mouthpiece I could find, and I didn't like any of them. Then after high school, I went out for a year full-time in a traveling dance band, playing cover tunes and stuff, you know, Earth, Wind, and Fire in Chicago and all that stuff. And after a year of that, I'd gone through every trumpet I could find, every mouthpiece I could find, and I didn't like any of them. And I was just barely a good enough player that I knew that the things that I didn't like about the equipment were not my fault, that there were inherent problems in the equipment. So I gave up the trumpet for about 2 years. I had nothing to do with the trumpet. I didn't play. I said, screw this. This is way harder than it should be. This is not my fault. I'm done. And I gave up the trumpet, I know, for a year and a half or so. And then got to the point where I missed being in the music world and around musicians, and started out as an instrument repairman then. I went to repair school.
What were the
and
things...
that got me into building instruments.
What were the things that the instruments that you were using didn't have or didn't do?
Well, they were remarkably inconsistent in pitch and timbre and resistance over the range of the instruments. The bottom line is almost every wind instrument on the planet, every wind instrument that I'm aware of on the planet, changes pitch when you play from soft to loud, and it changes pitch when you play from high to low. And on modern brass instruments with conventional mouthpieces, the octaves are compressed. That's why you see trumpet players and brass players bobbing their heads up and down when they play and raising their shoulders in the upper register and tightening up and squeezing the high notes out, is because the equipment is so out of tune that they have to compensate in their bodies. So what I ended up doing was figuring out how to build trumpets and mouthpieces for other brass instruments that don't change pitch when you play from low to high or from soft to loud. And the key to that was that I started practicing yoga and then teaching Kundalini yoga. And I studied the Alexander technique, and I did everything I could to get my body to neutral so that when I played, I could objectively evaluate how goofy old-fashioned equipment was, so then I knew how to change it. See, because if you just play with a bunch of compensations and you're not objective about what's going on because you're compensating without knowing it, then you don't know how to build a better mousetrap. So I had to get to neutral, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So what kind of changes did you make without revealing any secrets?
Well, among other things, contemporary brass instruments are really the victims of tradition, in that the mouthpieces that are sold by the hundreds of thousands or millions around the world in music stores are based on designs from 100 years ago, when the instruments were physically longer and pitched in a lower key. And when you put a lower keyed mouthpiece on a modern higher pitched instrument, it makes the octaves compress, which is why you see all the brass players bobbing their heads up and down when they play. You think they're saying yes, but really they're just kind of tightening and trying to adjust in their body and play in tune. So when you raise your head up, it raises the pitch center of your body and compensates for an inherent flat upper register in a 100-year-old mouthpiece. When you lower your head down, it lowers the pitch center of your body and compensates for the inherent sharp or high pitch center in the low register of a conventional, old-fashioned mouthpiece, conventional mouthpiece. So my thing was, I built horns for the first couple of years, 83 to 85, and then I ran into this roadblock because the mouthpieces were still a limiting factor, and that's when I got the vision, okay, we need to make mouthpieces specific for the key of instrument that have constant pitch center and don't change pitch over the register, so that we can stop bobbing our heads up and down and doing all that crap and playing tight. So that's what happened. 1985 was a big year for me. It's the year the first Monette mouthpieces that were made. It's the year I started teaching Kundalini Yoga in Chicago.
Wow.
The year I met John Hennis and started doing Alexander technique with him.
So how long have you been in this location here?
September of 92.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, I was in Chicago for a number of years, 10 years, and then when the business was successful enough and it, everything was stable, it's like, okay, I want to move back to Oregon. I love living in Oregon. I need to live where all the ferns are, all the trees.
So when do you get a chance to play trumpet for your own pleasure?
I am an industrial trumpet player now, and I do not play for my own pleasure until we have a new prototype horn that's here, and I'll just play some tunes around the shop or something.
Really?
But I haven't played a union gig in forever, and pretty much I let my customers and clients play for me, and they do a better job than I could do anyway. So.
Well, suppose you were at a gig with some very prestigious, guy that plays your instrument and goes, "Hey, Dave, come on up and sit in."
See, most of them know me well enough that they know that that would not enhance the overall musical quality of their performance situation. Now, my thing is not to play for a living.
Yeah.
My thing was to be a good enough player that I could figure out what the problems were in these instruments and then try and make those problems a little less of an obstacle. Try and work through the problems so that others could have a little better time communicating their musical message. And that's my life's work. That's what I love.
Yeah. If you were to play, what kind of material do you think you would play?
Oh, small group jazz is my favorite.
Yeah?
Improvisational in the moment, intimate communication, small group jazz is the only way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the only way to go.
So, your 30th anniversary is coming up. You have having a big celebration next week. What do you see? What is your vision for the future?
Well, that's a good question. I've got about 4 lifetimes worth of cool instruments that I want to build, and I'm going to run out of time. So I'm just going to keep making the horns better. About every 2 or 3 months, the horns get better. We figure out a way to make the horns better. And then over years, all those little incremental improvements add up. And the horns we're building now, we're making a 30th anniversary kind of series of horns that is so outrageous. These are really the horns I've dreamed of making my whole life.
Really?
Finally. Yeah, it took 30 years, and now we're making the horns I've really dreamed of. And it's cool.
Well, congratulations. Happy anniversary. Many more, and just best of luck with everything that you do.
Thank you so much, Tom.